in the dim, suffocating glow of a single flickering overhead bulb. I sit hunched over my worn canvas, trembling fingers clutching a charcoal stick that feels more like a weapon than a tool. The room is silent except for the soft scratch of graphite against rough paper, a rhythmic trembling that echoes the pounding in my chest. Shadows dance across the cracked walls, resembling the fractured pieces of my mind as I carefully sketch a distorted self-portrait. Eyes elongated and hollow, mouth twisted in a silent scream, hair jagged and tangled like the chaos within me. The scent of stale paint and dust mingles with the bitter taste of fear lingering on my tongue, making my stomach churn. I stare at my reflection in the cracked mirror propped against the wall, eyes darting with suspicion and dread. "What am I doing?" I whisper under my breath, voice trembling like the fragile glass of my composure. My fingers tighten around the charcoal as I trace the crooked lines, each stroke a deliberate act of rebellion against the suffocating expectations that have haunted my family's legacy for generations. The room feels almost alive, pulsing with the weight of secrets I've kept buried beneath layers of silence and shame. Outside, the wind howls through the cracked window frames, echoing the ghostly echoes of a past I refuse to forget. In this solitude, I am both the artist and the victim of my own torment, caught in a web of pain, spun from memories I can't escape. My mind drifts, fleeting images flickering like old film. My childhood, the shadowed face of my grandfather lurking behind closed doors, his voice a low whisper, inflicting invisible wounds. Did I truly choose this moment? Or was I driven by a darker force I barely understand? As I add a final jagged line to the portrait's distorted face, I feel a shiver of foreboding, as if the image I've created is more than just art. It's a mirror to the chaos inside me, a silent confession of the storm brewing beneath my skin. The room grows colder, and I clutch my trembling hands close to my chest, whispering once more, "They'll never believe what I've become." Knowing deep down that this self-portrait is more than just a reflection, it's a fragment of my fractured soul, a harbinger of the truth I can no longer hide. The moment I noticed the thick, vellum envelope resting unopened on my cluttered desk, my breath caught, an ominous weight pressing against my chest. The paper bore the unmistakable crest of my grandfather's family, a tarnished emblem etched in gold that shimmered faintly in the dim light, casting intricate shadows across the worn surface. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, feeling the rough texture of the wax seal beneath my fingertips, a silent sentinel guarding secrets I'd long tried to forget. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the old radiator and the soft rustle of papers scattered across my desk. But my mind spiraled into chaos as I hesitated before breaking the seal. "What's so urgent that he'd send me this now?" I whispered aloud, voice trembling with a mixture of curiosity and dread. My eyes flicked to the window, shadows from the gnarled oak outside stretching across the walls, as if the darkness itself sought to conceal what lay inside. Carefully, I broke through the wax, the seal cracking open with an ominous whisper, revealing a single sheet of aged parchment, its edges frayed, ink slightly faded but still legible. I unfolded it slowly, my heart pounding in my ears, and read the words scrawled in my grandfather's familiar, authoritative handwriting. "There are truths buried in our blood that you must see for yourself. Do not trust what you think you know. Meet me where shadows linger, and face what you have refused to believe." My breath hitched, every nerve tingling with a strange mixture of anticipation and terror. As I held the letter close, shadows from the flickering candle danced across my face, distorting my reflection in the cracked mirror propped against the wall. I knew, in that moment, that this letter was the key to unlocking a past darker than I had ever imagined, one that would force me to confront the ghosts lurking beneath my family's polished veneer. I clenched my fists, feeling the rough fabric of my sleeve, and whispered with steely resolve, "This is the beginning." My eyes darted back to the window, where the darkness deepened, and a shiver ran down my spine as I wondered what secrets my grandfather had hidden behind the iron gates of his estate. Secrets that now threatened to emerge, threatening to shatter everything I thought I knew about myself, about family, about justice. The shadows seemed to reach out, beckoning me into the abyss, and I realized that I could no longer turn away. Whatever awaited at that rendezvous, whether truth or nightmare, would change me forever. Young Elara clutched her small, trembling fingers around the delicate porcelain tea set, the fine china shimmering under the golden glow of the chandeliers that hung like frozen stars from the high ceiling of her grandfather's estate. She had been told to stay close, to mind her manners, but her curious eyes darted across the lavish room, absorbing every flicker of shadow and light, every soft creak of the antique floorboards beneath her tiny feet. Her innocence was a fragile bubble, unaware of the dark undercurrents rippling beneath the veneer of grandeur. She watched her grandfather, a tall man with silver hair and a warm, commanding smile that hid something colder beneath, something that made her tiny chest tighten with an inexplicable unease. "Grandpa, why do you always look at that door like you're hiding something?" she had asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as her small fingers fidgeted with the lace of her dress. He chuckled, a deep, reassuring sound that echoed through the vast hall. "Oh, little one," he said, kneeling down to her level, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Some secrets are best kept behind closed doors. You'll learn that someday. For now, just enjoy your visit." But her mother, standing nearby with a hurried glance, had stiffened at those words, her eyes darting away with a flicker of worry. "Elara, remember what I told you?" Her mother whispered fiercely, voice trembling. "Some truths are dangerous. Stay silent. Keep your innocence." Elara's gaze flickered back to her grandfather's face, which seemed to shift subtly, the warmth in his smile fading for a fleeting second, replaced by a dark glint that chilled her blood. As he reached out to her, ruffling her hair with a gentle touch, Elara noticed the faint scar that ran from his knuckles to his wrist, partially hidden beneath his sleeve. It was a tiny detail, yet it pierced her childlike perception with a whisper of something sinister lurking just beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect world. Her mind, too young to fully grasp the implications, only sensed the contradiction. The kindness in his eyes, the flickering shadows behind his gaze, the heavy silence that followed her questions. That day, in that grand echoing hall, Elara's innocence was quietly fractured, her picture of her beloved grandfather forever tinged with suspicion and dread that she couldn't yet name. The memory lingered, dense and visceral, as if etched into her very bones, threatening to surface again when she least expected it, pulling her deeper into the darkness she was destined to confront. In the dim, suffocating silence of the attic, Elara's trembling hands brushed aside layers of dust and peeling wallpaper to reveal an old, battered trunk tucked away in the corner. The faint smell of mold and forgotten memories wafted upward as she hesitated, her pulse hammering against her ribs. With cautious curiosity, she lifted the heavy lid, revealing a jumble of yellowed papers, faded photographs, and a leather-bound journal that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Her fingers trembled as she grasped the fragile cover, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. As she flipped open the journal, the brittle pages crackled like distant thunder, and her eyes widened at the sight of hurried, jagged handwriting filling every inch of the paper. A surge of cold dread crawled up her spine as she began reading the first entry. "He's watching again. I can feel his eyes, cold and relentless, even when he's not in the room. I must keep it all hidden, pretend it's normal, but I know the truth now. This darkness runs too deep." Her breath hitched as she scrolled further, each page revealing a disturbing pattern of manipulation, subtle threats veiled as affection, and moments of outright abuse that she'd only sensed in fragments before. The words painted a portrait of a man revered by the world, yet beneath that polished veneer, a sinister obsession with control and dominance lurked. Her eyes darted over entries describing whispered threats. "If you tell anyone, I'll make sure they see you differently, just like I did with your mother." A shiver ran down her spine as she realized the terrifying cycle had begun long before her birth, rooted in silence and complicity. The journal detailed nights filled with manipulation, where her grandfather's voice would twist into something unrecognizable, whispering lies to weaken her resolve, and moments where he'd threaten her family's reputation if she dared to speak out. Her fingers clutched the pages desperately as a sudden memory flashed, her grandfather's warm smile cracking, revealing a flicker of something darker, something predatory. Her heart pounded painfully against her chest as she read how he meticulously crafted his facade, silencing those who dared to oppose him. With a sudden burst of courage, Alara whispered aloud, This explains everything." Her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and sorrow. She knew she'd uncovered a truth so terrible that it threatened to shatter her entire perception of her family. Yet a strange sense of clarity also emerged. She finally understood the roots of her own pain, and the reason why her childhood had been haunted by shadows she could never quite see. Carefully, she closed the journal, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, as the attic's oppressive silence pressed down on her. Her fingers lingered on the leather cover, feeling the weight of her discovery settle deep within her bones. She knew that confronting her grandfather was no longer just about uncovering family secrets. It was about exposing the darkness that had been lurking beneath their polished veneer for generations, and finally breaking free from the cycle she had inherited. Under the cloak of night, Alara slipped silently through the shadowed corridors of her grandfather's sprawling estate, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of distant wind rattling the windows and the soft scrape of her footsteps against the polished wooden floors. Clutching her recorder tightly in one trembling hand and her grandfather's worn diary in the other, she moved with calculated stealth, her breath catching in her throat as she reached the dimly lit doorway of his study. The room smelled of aged paper, leather, and a faint hint of cigar smoke long extinguished, a vault of secrets she was finally ready to open. Her fingertips brushed the cold brass handle before turning it slowly, the hinges whispering their protest as she eased the door open. Inside, the grand desk was cluttered with papers, but her eyes were drawn immediately to the leather-bound diary lying atop a stack of yellowed documents. Her grandfather's clandestine confessional, the key to unraveling the darkness that had haunted her family for generations. She hesitated only a moment, then stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her, the heavy oak thud echoing like a sentence being sealed. Her gaze flicked to the recorder in her hand, her thumb instinctively pressing the record button with a shaky but resolute motion. The room grew still, shadows dancing along the walls, as she finally whispered aloud, "Tonight I need answers. I need to hear it from you. Why did you hide everything? Why did you betray us all?" Her voice cracked, voice trembling with raw emotion, her eyes fixed on the diary as if it held the truth in its fragile pages. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as her fingers hovered over the diary's cover, ready to uncover the secrets that had been buried deep beneath the polished veneer of her family's reputation. In that quiet, tense moment, she knew her confrontation was no longer a choice. It was her final act of rebellion, her desperate attempt to unmask the darkness that had festered in silence for too many years, and perhaps to finally find the closure she so desperately craved. The dim, oppressive glow of the single flickering bulb cast jagged shadows across the battered, cluttered room as I stepped cautiously toward the aging man, seated rigidly in the battered armchair. His face, once handsome and commanding, was now gaunt and lined with the weight of years, but his eyes still gleamed with an unsettling, calculating light. The air felt thick with unspoken accusations, and every breath I took seemed to draw me deeper into a turbulent storm of memories and suppressed rage. I clenched my fists, feeling the rough texture of the recorder pressed tightly between my fingers, then boldly pressed the record button, the metallic click echoing unnaturally in the silence. My voice wavered but held firm as I demanded, "Why did you hide everything? Why did you betray us all? Tell me the truth, Uncle. I need to know what you've been protecting for so long." The old man's lips twisted into a thin, contemptuous smile, and he leaned back slowly, the chair creaking under his weight as he fixed his cold gaze upon me. "You think you're ready for the answers, girl? You think uncovering the skeletons in our family's closet will set you free? You're naive." His voice was smooth but dripping with venom, laced with a sinister calm that chilled me to the bone. "You have no idea what you're asking for. The truth isn't some simple story to be told and digested. It's a dark web of secrets, manipulation, and lies that run deeper than you could ever understand." His eyes flicked away for a moment, revealing a flicker of menace as he slowly pushed himself to a standing position, his movements deliberate, almost predatory. "You think you're the only one haunted by our past? You think your little recordings and questions can unravel what's been carefully woven for generations? You're just a child playing with fire, Ilara. You have no idea what you're about to unleash." His voice lowered to a threatening whisper as he inched closer, the scent of stale tobacco and old wood lingering in the stale air. "So go ahead, ask me again, see what truth you earn. But be warned, some truths are better left buried, because once exposed they stain everything and everyone they touch. And I won't let you destroy what's left of this family, nor what's left of me." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I glimpsed the sinister shadow lurking beneath his facade, a reflection of a past long buried but never truly gone, ready to claw its way back into the light at any cost. My pulse hammered in my chest as I realized I'd crossed a line, and with trembling voice, I pressed on, knowing that the answers I sought might irrevocably change us all, unleashing horrors I was only beginning to understand. The air grew heavy with unspoken rage as my grandfather's voice, once laden with condescension, twisted into a sneer filled with venom. "You're just a child playing with fire, Ilara," he hissed, stepping closer with deliberate menace, his eyes glinting with a sinister light that sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea what you're about to unleash." His words were a dagger wrapped in silk, but beneath them lurked a darkness that I'd glimpsed in fleeting moments. Something ancient, cruel, and unyielding. The stale scent of tobacco and dust clung to him, and I felt the oppressive weight of history pressing down as his shadow stretched across the dimly lit room. "Some truths are better buried," he continued, voice lowering into a threatening whisper. "Because once exposed, they stain everything and everyone they touch. And I won't let you destroy what's left of this family, nor what's left of me." His narrowed eyes pierced mine, revealing that beneath his polished veneer lurked a deeper, darker secret, an abyss I'd only begun to understand. My pulse hammered in my ears, each beat a thunderclap of defiance and dread, as I clenched my fists, trembling but resolute. "Tell me," I demanded, voice barely more than a whisper itself, yet sharp enough to cut through the thick air. "What really happened? Why did you do it?" His face contorted into a cruel smirk, dismissive and cold, as if my question was an insult rather than a plea. That was the moment, a fragile line between silence and chaos, where my trembling fingers closed into fists, and in a surge of primal fury, I launched myself forward. The first punch landed with a sickening crack, my knuckles instinctively driven by years of suppressed pain. His head snapped back, a grunt escaping his lips. But I didn't stop. I grabbed his collar, pulling him close as my voice cracked with fury I hadn't known I possessed. "You think you're untouchable? That your lies will protect you forever?" I spat, clawing at his face with trembling hands, nails raking skin, tearing through layers of polished lies to expose the raw wound beneath. He staggered, shock flickering in his eyes, and I saw the cracks in his facade, The moment when the carefully constructed mask of power shattered, revealing the beast beneath. My mind was a whirlwind. Rage, desperation, a desperate need to break free from the years of silence, of hiding, of living beneath shadows. I never chose. I pushed him aside, my voice rising to a shriek, filled with every ounce of fury I'd buried, my fists pounding against his chest and shoulders, inflicting not just physical pain but psychological torment, an act of rebellion, a scream for justice. Blood blurred my vision as I pressed my hands onto his shoulders, forcing him to look into my eyes, wild with grief and wrath. "You'll never silence me," I breathed between clenched teeth, every word soaked in raw, unfiltered truth. The room spun as I delivered blow after blow, the visceral violence an extension of years of suppressed trauma finally unleashed. And in that chaos, I realized I wasn't just fighting him. I was fighting the darkness that had haunted our family for generations, and I was willing to burn everything down to end it. Overwhelmed by the storm of rage and despair, I found myself trembling uncontrollably as my hands gripped his collar, nails digging into the fabric of his shirt. His eyes, once filled with a twisted mix of condescension and fear, widened in shock as I loomed over him, voice cracking with raw emotion. "You lied," I whispered angrily, my breath ragged. "You lied about everything. About her, about us, about the monsters you kept hidden." Each word was punctuated by a violent shudder that coursed through my trembling frame. My fists clenched tighter, nails digging into my palms. But it was my voice that cracked the most. Loud, trembling, desperate. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? That your secrets stay buried forever?" I felt the hot sting of tears threatening to spill. Yet I pressed on, my words turning into whispers of accusations, trembling with fury and pain. The room was thick with silence, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant hum of the world outside, unaware of the chaos within these walls. Then came the moment. My hand shot out, instinct and impulse overriding reason, and I grabbed his throat with trembling desperation. His eyes bulged as I squeezed, the world narrowing to the sensation of my fingers tightening around his neck, my trembling voice still whispering accusations between gasps. "You hurt her. You hurt us all, and I won't let you get away with it anymore." My vision blurred, my hands trembling violently as I felt his life slipping away, my heart pounding in my ears. Until, finally I released him, chest heaving, tears blurring my sight. The chaos subsided into a deafening silence, the weight of what I'd just done settling over me like a crushing shadow. I collapsed onto the floor, trembling uncontrollably, whispering through choked sobs. "It's over. It's finally over." My trembling hands clutched the blood-stained gloves, the rough fabric still sticky and warm against my fingertips, as if the violence had seeped into my skin, refusing to wash away. The room around me was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the ragged cadence of my shallow breaths, each inhale sharp and shallow like I'd been running through a storm, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I glanced at the tiny pool of dark crimson pooling on the cold wooden floor, the stark reminder of the moment I had crossed a line I never thought I'd approach. My mind spiraled, racing with a torrent of conflicting emotions. Relief that it was finally over, guilt gnawing at my insides, and an almost surreal detachment from what I'd just done. My eyes darted toward the ornate painting that hung crookedly on the wall, my secret hiding spot. I pushed aside the heavy velvet curtain hanging over it, my fingers trembling uncontrollably as I reached for the loose panel behind the frame, sweating as if the air itself was trying to force me back. With trembling precision, I slid open the hidden compartment, revealing a small, dark cavity, just enough space to conceal what I now desperately needed to hide. I fumbled in my coat pocket, pulling out the bloodied gloves with care that betrayed my shaky composure, as if I was delicate and fragile, about to shatter at any moment. The fabric was stiff with drying blood, the scent thick and metallic, lingering stubbornly in the cramped space. I shoved the gloves inside, pressing down on them as if to smush the evidence further into the shadows, then hurriedly replaced the panel, my hands trembling so violently I feared I might rip the fragile frame of the painting. No one can find out, I whispered to myself, voice trembling, thick with a mixture of fear and resolve. I pressed my palms against the wall, trying to steady my racing heart, feeling the burn of tears behind my eyes. "What have I done?" a voice inside me begged. But another darker voice whispered back, cold and relentless, "You did what had to be done." The room's silence closed in as I staggered backward, clutching the hidden evidence, my mind a whirlwind of chaos, guilt, relief, and the haunting certainty that I'd forever carry the weight of this secret, buried behind a carefully crafted wall of silence and shadows. Haunted by her act, I sit motionless in the dim glow of my studio, my eyes fixed on the chaotic whirlwind of colors splattered across the canvas, an abstract reflection of the storm raging inside me. The air feels thick, heavy with unspoken guilt and residual dread, as if the walls themselves are listening. Shadows flicker at the edge of my vision, and I swear I catch a glimpse of my grandfather's face, craggy, with piercing eyes that seem to pierce right through me, his sinister smile curling at the corners of a memory I can't fully grasp. "You're free," I whisper, voice trembling, the words hollow and false, but the smile lingers, twisted and menacing, echoing from some dark corner of my mind. I clutch my trembling hands, fingers curling into fists, feeling the rough texture of the paintbrush still clenched in one, my only weapon against the ghosts that refuse to fade. The room hums with silence, punctuated only by the frantic pounding of my pulse and the faint scrape of my brush against the canvas. I hear my own voice in my head, desperate to drown out the whispers. It's done. It's finally over. Yet the image of my grandfather's face refuses to dissolve, his eyes burning with a cruelly mocking light. Every brushstroke I make feels like a plea, an attempt to tame the chaos, to make sense of the horror I've unleashed. But beneath the layers of paint, beneath the trembling surface, I know this chaos is rooted deep within me, layered as thick as the blood I spilled. My breath catches as flashes of that night seize me. How the shadows in that cramped room had stretched long and sinister, mirroring the darkness that now engulfs my soul. The memory of his cold, calculating voice echoes, mocking my fleeting hope. "You thought you could escape?" His laughter haunts me as I stare at the wild, jagged strokes of crimson and black that threaten to consume the entire canvas. Just like the storm inside my mind, I whisper again, trembling, "I did what I had to do." But even as the words leave my lips, I realize I am lost, adrift in a labyrinth of guilt and despair, unable to distinguish the difference between my blurry memories and the monstrous face that still haunts my darkest nights. The painting before me pulsates with frenetic energy, a visceral scream of my trauma. Yet beneath its chaos, I sense a fragile attempt at redemption. Still the shadows linger, and I know that no matter how deeply I bury the truth behind thick layers of paint, the echoes of that sinister face will forever echo in the corners of my mind, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. The moment the news of my grandfather's death rippled through the tightly woven fabric of our family, an abrupt, unsettling whisper that traveled faster than the truth itself, I could feel the walls of my carefully constructed facade trembling. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat alone in the dim confines of my room, the faint glow of the street lamp outside casting elongated shadows across my cluttered desk, where scattered sketches of broken faces and tangled lines mirrored my spiraling thoughts. The phone suddenly vibrated in my hand, and I hesitated only a heartbeat before answering, my voice trembling. "Hello." My mother's voice crackled with a strained mixture of grief and suspicion. "Ilara, did you hear? Grandfather's gone. The funeral's tomorrow. We're all worried about you." I forced a breathless laugh, trying to mask the growing panic. "Worry? Why would I worry? I barely knew him anymore. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded hollow, rehearsed, because deep inside, I felt the noose tightening, a gnawing dread that every piece of my dark secret was slipping through the cracks of my mind, threatening to unravel everything. The faint scent of burnt sage from my recent painting session mingled with the metallic tang of my own sweat, amplifying my senses as I listened intently, searching for the slightest sign of suspicion from her voice. But her tone was careful, edged with grief and something else. Something I couldn't quite identify. I knew they suspected me. The subtle glances, the hushed conversations behind closed doors, the way my mother's eyes lingered longer than usual when she mentioned justice or truth. I watched every movement, every word, because I couldn't afford to slip. The ghosts of that night, the torment I inflicted that day, haunted me relentlessly. And now, with death casting its shadow, I wondered, am I already exposed? My mind raced through the labyrinth of my memories, replaying the moments I had spent with him, the cold fury I had kept buried deep within, and the visceral urge that had driven me to act. An act I told myself was necessary, but that now threatened to consume me entirely. The house felt suffocating, each shadow morphing into a sinister face, whispering accusations I dared not face aloud. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, trying to hold on to the fragile veneer of control. They'll never understand, I muttered under my breath, voice thick with dread. They'll never know what pushed me to the edge. The silence stretched long and ominous, broken only by the distant echo of footsteps in the hallway, a reminder that the walls were closing in, and my secrets, once hidden in darkness, now threatened to drown me in a tide of revelation I wasn't prepared to face. And yet, beneath the mounting paranoia and fear, a strange, obsessive hope persisted, that somewhere in the chaos, I could still find the fragments of truth I needed. Truth that would finally justify the nightmare I'd become, or perhaps finally condemn me forever. As law enforcement officers circled around the dimly lit room, their footsteps heavy on the faded wooden floor, I felt my heart pounding in a frantic, uneven rhythm. My trembling hands clutched the worn, leather-bound journals and the outdated tape recorder I had hidden away so long ago. Relics of my desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos I'd unleashed. Did I really do this? Was it justice? Or just another shadow I've cast upon myself? I whispered, voice trembling as I pressed the play button on the old recorder, hearing my own voice crack as I recounted the night everything fell apart. The words spilled out raw and unfiltered, revealing every agonizing detail. My torment, my rage, the moments of doubt I'd buried deep beneath layers of shame. Each recording was a confession, a fragment of my fractured mind, but now, as the investigators' flashlights flickered across the walls, I questioned whether my revenge had been justified, or if I'd crossed a line too dark to ever come back from. I ran my fingers over the edges of the journals, thick with my handwriting, the ink smudged and trembling, like my resolve. Did I do this for them? Or for me? I murmured, voice thick with tears tucked deep inside. The room felt colder, heavier, as if the shadows themselves were closing in, whispering accusations I dared not voice aloud. I looked into the mirror across the room and saw a reflection, not of a girl seeking justice, but of a monster I barely recognized. Eyes hollow, face scarred by secrets I'd fought so hard to hide. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, an unbearable burden, as I struggled to decipher if I had truly broken free, or merely created a new prison, one from which there was no escape. With trembling breath, I clenched my fists and whispered into the dark. Was it worth it? Or am I just another ghost haunting the ruins of my own making? The shadows seemed to pulse with silent anticipation, waiting to see if I would finally accept the truth. That my revenge had torn apart more than just my grandfather. It had unraveled the very core of who I was. Ilara's mind fractured into 1,000 shards, each one reflecting a distorted fragment of her past. her trauma, and her guilt. Vivid hallucinations clawed their way into her consciousness with relentless precision. Her grandfather's voice slipping through the shadows like a poisonous whisper. "You're weak, Alara. You'll never be enough. Just like your mother." She clutched her head as if to contain the storm, her breath ragged and uneven. The room around her warped into a sickening kaleidoscope of memories. Images flickering like broken film reels. His face, twisted with a cruel smile, appeared in the darkness, looming closer with every heartbeat. "You think you're missing something? No, child. You're just incomplete." The whisper grew sharper, more insidious, digging into her skull like 1,000 needles. She staggered back, her fingertips trembling as they brushed the cold, cracked surface of a mirror. Her reflection stared back, eyes wide and unfocused, a haunted vessel of guilt and madness. "No more," she rasped, voice trembling. "No more lies. No more secrets." Yet even as she spoke, the hallucinations deepened, her grandfather's cruel smile transforming into a twisted mask of satisfaction. "You'll never escape me," he hissed, voice echoing like a death knell. In that moment, Alara felt her reality splinter completely. Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting truths, her desperate plea for sanity battling the dark whispers that threatened to consume her entirely. Each hallucination dragged her further into madness, blurring the line between her fractured memories and the present, until she collapsed onto the cold floor, trembling as the shadows danced around her, threatening to swallow her whole. Alara took a deep breath, her trembling hands clutching the microphone as she stepped onto the makeshift platform, the dim room suddenly silent except for the faint hum of anticipation. Her eyes flickered with a storm of emotion, fear, rage, and an unshakable resolve. Before she finally found her voice, "I've kept secrets for too long," she began, voice cracking but growing steadier with each word. "It's time to tell the truth, no matter how dark or impossible it seems." She paused, swallowing hard as her gaze swept over the gathered spectators. Journalists, family members, strangers, each eyes hungry for answers, unaware of the storm swirling inside her. Her fingers trembled as she clenched her fists, then released them, trying to maintain composure. "My grandfather was more than just a family figure," she continued, voice raw with vulnerability. "He was a monster. For years I buried what I knew, what I saw. I thought I could forget, move on, pretend it didn't happen. But it did, and it haunted me every single day." Her voice wavered, but she pushed forward, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "Last night I finally confronted him. I went to his house knowing I might never come back. Or worse, become something I despise." She paused, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, then clenched her jaw. "He tried to manipulate me, to deny everything, but I had proof. Records, journals, scars I never wanted anyone to see. I couldn't let it continue. I couldn't let him destroy more lives." Her voice grew steadier, each word edged with conviction. "And yes, I tortured him. I beat him. I screamed at him. I inflicted pain, physical and psychological, until I felt something I'd never felt before. Power. Because for the first time, I fought back against the darkness he trapped us in. I wanted him to feel what it was like to be helpless, to know what he had done to us." Silence hung thick as her confession sank in. She took a trembling step closer, her eyes shimmering with tears and fury. "And then I killed him," she whispered, voice almost inaudible. "Not out of hatred alone, but out of desperation. Desperation to end the cycle, to finally take control of my life. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's my truth." Her voice cracked, and she closed her eyes for a moment, breath hitching. When she opened them, her stare was fierce, unyielding. "I want everyone to understand that this isn't just about murder. It's about breaking free from a family's dark legacy, about confronting the monsters we've inherited, and maybe, just maybe, finding some shred of redemption in the chaos." Her words lingered in the air like a thunderclap, raw and unfiltered, as the room remained frozen in shock, uncertain whether to condemn her or to see her as a victim of her circumstances. In that moment, Ilara's confession shattered the silence, leaving behind a trail of questions, doubts, and a haunting sense that perhaps, in her act of violence, she had finally found her voice. Her voice trembled as she finally broke the heavy silence, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and an undercurrent of fierce determination. "You want to know why I did it?" she whispered, voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heartbeat. "It wasn't just about anger or revenge for a petty insult. No, it's something darker. Something I've carried with me for years, buried beneath layers of shame and guilt." She paused, her trembling hands clenched into fists as she looked down at the stained floorboards. Then back up, her gaze locking onto the stunned faces around her. "My grandfather," she continued, voice cracking. "He wasn't just the stern old man everyone loved to fear. He was a monster, hidden behind a facade of respectability. But a monster nonetheless. He raped my mother when she was just a girl. I found her diary, hidden in the attic, filled with her trembling confessions and the shame she carried like a shroud. I saw the scars on her soul, the silent tears she never dared to wipe away in front of us. And I swore to myself, that I'd do anything to end that cycle of darkness." Her eyes flashed with a mixture of fury and sorrow. "When I confronted him, I didn't go in with a plan. I just saw him, sitting there pretending to be innocent, when I knew the truth. He looked at me like I was nothing, like I was just a ghost haunting his conscience. And in that moment, I lost control. I didn't just lash out. I wanted him to feel what my mother felt. The helplessness, the shame, the terror of being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from." Her voice grew raw, almost frantic. "I tortured him, yes, because I needed him to understand the pain he'd caused. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be powerless against someone so much bigger, so much more vicious than himself. I held him down, watched his face contort in agony. Not just from my hands, but from the shame I poured into every word I spat at him. And when he finally begged for mercy, I didn't listen. I pressed my hands harder because I knew if I stopped, the cycle would never end. I strangled him, felt his breath weaken, saw his eyes roll back. And with that, I finally took his life, knowing I was ending a chapter of horror that had poisoned generations of my family." Her voice faltered, tears spilling down her cheeks. It was never just about vengeance. It was about justice, about finally smashing the silence that allowed him to destroy so many lives, including my mother's. "I never wanted to be a monster. I only wanted to be free. Free from his shadow, from the shame, from the pain. And maybe, in some twisted way, I thought that if I killed him, I could finally put an end to the darkness that haunted us all. But I was wrong. I see that now. I'm just as broken as he was. Maybe even more so." Her shoulders heaved with a shuddering breath, and she looked away, tears streaming freely down her face, trembling with the weight of her confession. "That's why I did it," she whispered again, voice hollow. "Because I couldn't let it continue. Because I couldn't bear to see another generation suffer in silence. And because, deep down, I knew that if I didn't stop him, I'd never be able to forgive myself, or anyone else, ever again." As Ilara's trembling voice echoed through the cold, dimly lit courtroom, every eye widened in stunned silence. Her words, raw and unfiltered, shattered the veneer of societal morality that had long concealed the family's darkest secrets. "It wasn't just about revenge," she whispered, her voice quaking beneath the weight of years of hidden pain. "It was about ending a cycle of silence, about stopping him from destroying lives. My mother's, my sister's, everyone's, by finally confronting the monster beneath the family's polished image." Her hands trembled as she clutched the worn fabric of her shirt, eyes darting between the stunned crowd and her trembling reflection in the polished floor. "I didn't do it out of hatred or malice alone," she added, voice thick with emotion. "I did it because I loved her, because I refused to let her suffer in darkness anymore. even if that darkness was wrapped around my own soul. I saw his shadows creeping into everything, his manipulations, his violence, until I couldn't tell where he ended. And I began. I knew that if I let him live, the silence would only deepen, and the cycle of pain would continue. Her breath hitched as she pushed forward, voice rising with quiet defiance. Yes, I tortured him. Yes, I ended his life, because I believed that was the only way to free us from his grip, to finally break the chains of shame and secrecy that had bound us for generations. A shudder ran through her as she stared down at her trembling hands, blood-stained yet strangely calm. You see, what I did was born from love. Distorted, perhaps, but real. I wanted justice, yes. But more than that, I wanted the truth to surface. No matter how ugly it was, I wanted the world to see what he truly was. Not the family man, not the revered patriarch, but a monster who had haunted us all, feeding on our silence and suffering. Her voice cracked as tears spilled again, eyes pleading for understanding. I knew it was wrong. But I also knew I couldn't live another day with his darkness suffocating us, pressing down like an iron grip. That's why I did it, because I loved her, and I loved us enough to finally shatter the silence, even if it meant becoming something terrible in the process. Silence fell thick and heavy, the air thick with disbelief, and the weight of her confession, forcing everyone present to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes love and justice are tangled in shadows darker than anyone dares admit, and that breaking free from trauma can demand sacrifices so profound they threaten to consume everything. Ilara's voice wavered as she finally lowered the trembling recorder, her eyes pleading and haunted, her words spilling out like shards of shattered glass. I want you to understand. I didn't do it out of hatred or some twisted desire for revenge, she whispered, voice thick with raw emotion. It was about protecting her, my mother, my sister, from the darkness that lurked behind his smile, from the truth that would have destroyed us all if we'd ever spoken it aloud. When I was little, I watched him manipulate and scare her, saw the way her body would tremble in silent fear. And I knew deep down, that if I didn't act, if I didn't do something drastic, the cycle of silence, of hiding, would swallow us whole. So yes, I tortured him. I used every ounce of rage and despair I had to make him feel the fear he'd forced into others, to make him finally understand the pain he'd inflicted. And when I strangled that last breath from him, it wasn't just revenge. It was a desperate plea for justice, for truth. I saw the way his eyes widened in terror, the way he clawed at my hands as if he could still fight back, and I felt, not relief, but a sick clarity. I told myself he deserved it. He had robbed us of innocence, of safety, of trust, and I couldn't let him keep doing it in the shadows anymore. That night I wanted him to feel what it was like to be powerless, to be hunted, to be broken, because that's what he'd done to us for years. And when I finally ended him, I realized I was no longer just his granddaughter, but something darker, a protector twisted by the pain he'd inflicted. I loved her too much to let this secret keep destroying us, and I loved us enough to shatter everything, even if it meant becoming the monster I'd been running from all my life. Her voice cracked again, and she clutched her trembling hands to her chest, as if holding herself together was all that kept her from unraveling entirely. Silence stretched heavy once more, thick with the weight of her confession, every eye wide with shock and horror, because they could no longer deny the truth, that sometimes love and justice entwine in shadows so deep they threaten to swallow the very soul of those who dare to seek them. In the dim light of her prison cell, Ilara sat quietly on the edge of a battered wooden bench, her fingers trembling as she stared at the canvas propped against the wall. The final piece she had poured her soul into, before surrendering to the weight of her actions and their consequences. The jagged strokes of black and crimson bleeding into muted grays depicted a fractured landscape, a tumultuous storm of chaos and hope intertwined. Her eyes, clouded yet resolute, traced the chaotic lines, each a mirror of her own battered psyche, reflecting a journey through darkness toward a fragile dawn. She reached out, gently brushing her fingertips along the rough edges of the painting, as if trying to grasp something intangible. Redemption, perhaps, or the memory of the moment she had chosen to confess everything. Her voice, soft but unwavering, broke the silence. This was always inside me, a storm I couldn't contain, a truth I kept hidden beneath layers of shame and guilt. I painted it here so I wouldn't forget that, even in the worst darkness, there's a hint of light, something worth fighting for. As her words hung in the air, her expression softened, a faint smile touching her cracked lips. For the first time in years, she felt a subtle sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that her punishment, her confinement, was merely another chapter in her ongoing struggle to find meaning beyond her scars. Her therapy sessions began, where guided reflections and raw honesty slowly chipped away at the armor of shame she had worn for so long. Each session felt like peeling back layers of a tangled web, exposing the core of her pain and hope. She learned to forgive herself, or at least to understand her own brokenness, recognizing that her actions, terrible as they were, stemmed from a desperate desire to end the cycle of abuse and secrecy that had haunted her family for generations. Now, with her hands resting on her lap, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I can rebuild from these ashes piece by piece, one stroke at a time." Her voice trembling with vulnerability, yet infused with a new purpose. Her final painting, a riot of chaotic colors and fractured shapes, symbolized her tumultuous past and her fragile hope for redemption. It was imperfect, raw, like her, but it was honest. As she looked at it, a tear slipped down her cheek, not of sorrow but of tentative hope, as if in this act of creation she had laid to rest some part of her shadowed history and opened a door to a future she might one day learn to forgive. Ilara sat quietly in her dimly lit studio, her gaze fixed on the chaotic tapestry of colors and jagged shapes that dominated the canvas before her. The fractured image seemed to pulse with the scars of her past, dark swaths of black bleeding into fiery reds, jagged lines that resembled broken glass, and blotches of muted gray that hinted at unresolved shadows. She reached out hesitantly, her fingertips trembling as she traced the twisted contours, each stroke a testament to her tumultuous journey. Her eyes shimmered with a mixture of exhaustion and a fragile flicker of hope as she whispered softly, "This is it. My truth, my pain, my hope all in one." She paused, voice catching, then added, "Maybe I can rebuild from these ashes." Her words almost a prayer, a desperate plea to herself and the universe. The tears that welled in her eyes weren't born from sorrow, but from a strange sense of release, an acknowledgement that, confronting her darkness, had paved the way for something new. For the first time, she felt the heavy weight of guilt loosen its grip just a little, replaced by a trembling optimism that perhaps, in facing her fractured past honestly, she could forge a future free from shadows. The room was thick with silence, broken only by her shallow breaths and the faint crackle of the fading evening light filtering through the dusty window. As she leaned back, her fingers brushed the edge of her artwork, and she whispered, "Maybe it's not perfect, but it's honest." Her voice barely audible, trembling with vulnerability and tentative hope. In that quiet, sacred space, she finally understood that her scars, both painted and hidden, had become her strength, and in embracing her chaos, she was slowly, painfully, but surely learning to redefine herself beyond the darkness that once threatened to consume her. In the dim glow of her studio, Ilara sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor, her hands trembling as she cradled a small, weathered notebook, her most intimate confession. The room was thick with silence, punctuated only by the soft rustle of pages turning and the distant hum of the night outside. She paused, eyes fluttering shut for a moment, her breath shallow, then whispered into the darkness, "I did it because I had to. because no one else would. You think you knew him, but you never saw what he did behind closed doors, what he did to her. Her voice cracked as she spoke, raw and unguarded, the words spilling out in a desperate attempt to free herself from the weight of her secret. Her fingers traced the edges of a bleeding, fractured painting resting against the wall, an abstract reflection of her shattered soul, while tears welled in her eyes. "He was supposed to protect us," she whispered softly, "but he tore us apart instead." The memory surged, the flickering candlelight illuminating her grandfather's cruel smile, the cold touch of his hands as he silenced her mother's screams, and the helplessness that had filled her young heart. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, tinged with a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. "And I couldn't let him keep hurting us. I thought if I hurt him back, it would end the nightmare. I didn't plan to kill him. I just wanted him to feel the pain he caused us. But it went too far, and I lost myself in that moment." She looked up at the shadowy ceiling, her eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and despair. "I tortured him, yes. I made him suffer, the way he made us suffer, until I couldn't tell where his pain ended and mine began. And then, when he finally stopped breathing, I realized I'd become what I despised. I'd become the monster I'd fought so hard to destroy." Her voice broke as she clenched her fists, trembling in the quiet darkness. "But I don't regret it. Not entirely. Because sometimes justice isn't neat or kind. Sometimes it's a terrible, bloody mess, just like life itself. And maybe, just maybe, in confronting that darkness, I've finally found a sliver of peace, or at least the courage to face whatever comes next." She leaned back against the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling, whispering one last time, "I did what I had to do, and I'm still here, still breathing, still fighting the ghosts that refuse to stay buried." The night seemed to hold its breath as her confession faded into the silence, leaving behind a haunting truth that challenged every moral boundary, every notion of justice, and every hope for redemption.